Welcome everyone. I am Catfish Franklin and this here is Catfish Corner. And today's story is called The Unsilent Minority. But before I get to that, I would just like to thank you for stopping by here on YouTube. That is super cool. And I would also like to thank my members over on Patreon. Thanks to all of you as well. Now then, today's story, The Unsilent Minority. This is episode 4 of my series about Stack Lee, called Old News, featuring Stacko Lee, episode 4, The Unsilent Minority. Now, before we get any further, I would like to caution you, I am going to be reading an old newspaper report from just about right now 135 years ago. So there is some racist language in this article, and I'm going to be reading it as is. So if that's not your thing, I hope to see you in one of my music videos over there, where everything is always friendly. Yeah, it is here too, but anyway, I would encourage you though to maybe look past that, because there is very little of that language, and it is all old-timey terms. And the fact of it is, at least in my opinion, the story is just so interesting, I think it's worth giving it a try looking past. But you do whatever you feel is best for you, and I understand, and we're going to keep going. So, in episode 1, just to recap what we've done so far, in episode 1 we determined that Stagger Lee, his name was actually Stack Lee, is what he was known as at the time, at least as far as we can tell from the newspaper reports, and it's pretty conclusive. That was episode 1. In episode 2, we looked at the newspaper reports chronicling Stack Lee's murdering of William Lyons, which is what became the basis of the folk song, which is what has brought us to this point in the first place. That song, a great song which has marinated in the oral tradition, possibly one of the last songs ever to do that, because it was just, at the dawn of, printing sheet music and stuff like that, in a general sense. Anyways, that is the cornerstone of all of this, is that murder of William Lyons. So we looked at that, and then in episode 3, the last episode, we went back. Stack Lee had been in the papers for 8 years before that murder, and so we went back and looked at what he did, and it turns out he is a criminal, actually. That was not an isolated incident, or an accident of character, or anything like that. This dude is going around pistol whipping people, breaking their skulls, among other things. So that's what we looked at in the last episode. Now, in this episode, we're going to kind of start taking some of these individual accounts and looking at them, because some of them are so interesting, and I haven't really seen this stuff anywhere in the things that are already printed up about Stack Lee, and it's really cool. You can kind of start to see into that world of 1895 St. Louis, and it's starting to become populated with people. There's already all kinds of victims in his wake, and there's all kinds of cops and things like that. So this one right here, we're just gonna take one particular account, and this is one that I did kind of gloss over in the last episode. This is from the second time that I could find Stack Lee mentioned in the newspapers, and this is from September 15th, 1888, in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And one more thing that is interesting with this piece is that it's not principally about Stack Lee. Again, it's one of those things where he's like in the story, and he's like, in this one he's sort of involved in the crime, but it almost has nothing to do with him, and he's almost mentioned as an afterthought, but for some reason he's there. I like to I like to say that he is often crime adjacent if he is not actually involved in the crime. So that is pretty interesting, and also the reporting is very interesting. They had a different style back then. It's very much more dramatic and with not that much attention to detail at times. Two different characters in this story, you'll notice as I read it, have they have two different last names um, when they're mentioned. So, and it's clear it's the same person. So when if you happen to notice that, that's what's going on here. That's just it's bad reporting, but it is interesting. This is sort of a benign event that the way that they wrote about it is really funny to me. So, all that being said, let's get into this incident. Okay, 1888 this is. Which, P.S., I believe that's the same year that Jack the Ripper was active. So that's just an interesting kind of timeline comparison. Okay, A Negress's Rage is the title. The terrible fight in the 2nd District Police Court cage today is the subhead. Another subhead. Camelia Dickman, a black woman, overcomes a deputy marshal and chews a policeman's finger. A frightful scene. The serenity of the court disturbed by the episode. Okay, now we get into the actual article. Justice McCaffrey, sitting upon the 2nd District Police Court bench, the attorneys within the bar and the spectators without the bar of that tribunal were this morning startled by sounds of an unusual and frightful row issuing from the cage in which prisoners are kept before and after conviction on charges of violating city ordinances. There was a rush for the door of the cage, but the deputy marshals on duty there prevented spectators from entering and insisted on the crowd retiring to a respectful distance. All this while, a Negro woman's shrill voice and the sounds of a terrible struggle could be heard. Then, a man's hoarse voice, made almost shrill with pain, was heard above all the tumult, and the interest in the excluded crowd grew intense. Presently, the struggle ceased, and a black woman was brought out under the guard of several deputies and conveyed to the 3rd District Police Station. A policeman came out with a finger bleeding copiously and hurried away for medical attention. Not until then could the nature of the row be learned outside the cage. The black woman was Camelia Beckman, a very black, fat, and uncomely Camelia she was. She had been arrested, charged with disturbing the peace. With her, Lee Shelton and Prudy Evans were arrested. Day before yesterday, the trio made the corner of 10th and Christie Avenue interesting for a large concourse of people, for a disagreement had arisen between them over some matter of no importance, and they essayed a settlement of the difficulty via the gouging, scratching, biting, hair-pulling, and vituperating route. Lee and Prudy are intimate friends, but Camelia was not a silent minority, nor a quiet element in the discussion of their differences. She left the marks of her fingernails on Prudy's face, and the latter, who is a slender, pretty mulatto, would have suffered seriously but for Shelton's aid and the intervention of a policeman. The Black Camelia. This morning, on the call of their names, the Dickman woman mounted the stand and told her tale for as long a time as the judge would permit. She described a long series of events which had no bearing on the case, and informed the court that she was the mistress of a white man whose name she bore. The mulatto, Prudy Evans, told her story with something less of boldness but quite as much detail, and the result of it all was that Justice McCaffrey fined the women $10 each and Shelton $5. That she should be made to bear the imposition of a fine fired Camelia's soot-black, abundant breast with ire, and as she entered the cage after the announcement of the judge's decision, she pounced on the Evans woman fiercely, her teeth snapping like those of a maddened wild animal, and her eyes blazing. Prudy shrieked for help, for in the hands of Camelia she was a reed. The black woman's teeth closed on one of the girl's ears, and the shrieks grew louder. Deputy Marshal Joseph Israel threw open the door of the cage, and catching Camelia about the waist, dragged her away from Evans. The black woman then set upon Israel, shrieking, striking with both hands at once, kicking, and trying to bite. Deputy Marshal Boyce saw that Israel was in a fair way to be utterly wiped from the face of the earth, and hurried to his assistance. Policeman Kenny also entered the cage, and both men threw themselves upon the woman, drawing her away from Israel, who, pale and breathless as he was, lent what aid he could to subdue the insane negress. At last, by distributing their force over sections of the woman, they overcame her, but not until she had caught Policeman Kinney's finger between her teeth and had masticated it to her satisfaction. It was a fearful fight, for the woman was very strong and thoroughly oblivious to pain, so terrible was her anger. The deputies, the woman, and the policeman fought from one side of the cage to the other until one of the men caught her legs and the others secured firm hold of her arms. Bracelets were applied to her arms, and she was taken to the station. She will be arraigned again Monday morning on a charge of assault. That is a pretty bizarre story, when really all that, what do they call that, ballyhoo, all that ballyhoo of this story is basically just describing they were causing a disturbance on the street, they were arrested, and then when they were in court after they doled out the fines, the one lady got mad and caused a ruckus in the cage. She was pretty violent, but that's really all they're describing here, which is pretty funny. Another interesting thing about this article that I noticed is that Lee Shelton was only given a $5 fine, but the two women were given a $10 fine. So that's another thing that's just, I don't know what this means, but I've seen it, we've seen it here on this series already. He often gets a lesser sentence than the other folks. So that's an interesting detail. So that's really the story about the unsilent minority. Miss Camelia Dickman, or Beckman, depending which part of the article you read, she caused a real scene up in there and was pretty violent. And another thing that I thought was bizarre was that maybe this still happens, I don't know. They hold people in a cage while they're waiting to see the judge, I guess. So that's odd. But that's it. So this is a story where Stack Lee is kind of there, but it's really about someone else. So that's kind of our first look, I guess you would say, into some of the very strange things that Lee Shelton has gotten himself into. Now this one, I believe, is the only one of the other ones I'm going to talk about in the future that happened before the murder of William Lyons. But anyway, enough of all of that. That is today's story, The Unsilent Minority. I hope you liked this. If you did, please consider checking out my Patreon page. There's a link in the description below, of course. or donating, also at another link in the description, or something like that. This did take kind of a lot more work than my normal song videos. But it's fun, and I think it's interesting, and I figure some of you out there too might find it interesting. So we're going to keep it going. But for today, episode 4, that's all there is. Be good to each other out there, and well, I'll see you next time.